Talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. The Intellectual Podcast starts now.
And with that, we are back for another episode of the Intellectual Podcast, now coming at you as a show on our YouTube channel as well with video. So this is actually our first official video podcast. So welcome. We are in our 9th season of the show. If you are just joining us, thank you for joining us. There is over 300 hours of content available at the Intellectual Podcast, which you can find on all the podcast players that you could possibly use. I mean, we've been at it for a long time. So I'm going to get straight into it. We have 2 guests today. One is a friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, who I actually met through San Diego WhoCon, although we had been Facebook friends for a while before that. Being San Diego-based creatives, we have a tendency to meet each other online before we meet each other in person. So I'm going to bring him up. Here he is. Voice actor extraordinaire and soon to be seen with his face, not just here, but hopefully in other projects to come, Mr. Marc Biagi. Hello.
Hey everybody. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really excited to be here today and chatting with you again.
Yeah, speaking of San Diego WhoCon, we got another one of those coming up here in just a few weeks, right?
Yeah, we do. It's the weekend of the 20th, 21st? I can't remember. Let me bring up my calendar.
Is that next to last weekend of October, I believe?
Yeah, next to last weekend of October. There you go. 21st, 22nd, and 23rd.
There it is, yeah.
And
we will both be there.
Yeah, it's at the Handlery, I believe, this time. So we're returning to Mission Valley at that hotel.
Yeah, that's where I went and did my first one. Was the handle?
Yeah, and that's where we met. In person, like you said, and got to be even better friends and stuff. Had a really good time. So that's great.
So you're on the podcast today because I reached out to you and said, "Hey, I took a hiatus on the podcast at the close of pandemic. I'd been overwhelmed and I started a new job and it was just getting to be a lot. But I'm ready to get back at it." And I was like, I know Marc has done WhoCon with me, but I don't believe we actually ever got you on the actual podcast.
I don't think so.
I don't think we did. We talked about it, but we never made it happen. So I was determined to get you on. And unfortunately, the schedule worked out where Whitney couldn't join us today because she's coming back from some actor conference in Arizona.
Oh no, she's given me a ride on Wednesday night to a premiere of a film that I'm in. So,
well, there you go.
I'll see her then. So sorry we missed you today, Whitney.
You guys can have a virtual podcast of your own at that point.
Yeah, it's a fun little film. We'll talk about that another time. But yeah, when you approached me, it was like I have a project that I'm very much involved in right now. That is doing one of my first big thrusts into the audiobook world. Even though I've been a voice actor for many years, I've done a lot of other recording, a lot of video game animation, a lot of educational software, pretty much everything across the board. And storytelling has always been something I've loved. I'm a big science fiction fan and fantasy and all sorts of different genre-related stuff. So started thinking about putting my feet in and figuring out audiobook stuff. And I happened to meet Mason Thomas, who's a really great author who had a project he was looking to get voice work for. And it was like so many things coming together really well at once. And I'm really excited to be working on it. Mason's a great guy. We're going to meet him today. He's here, and we thought that we'd
Should we bring him on?
Talk about the project. Yeah, let's bring him in.
All right, Mason, here you go. There he is.
Hello.
Welcome, Mason.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
He's joining us from Chicago today, where he lives. So, but we actually met at Comic-Con, of all things.
It's just the weirdest random serendipity. How it just all came together and connected instantly as soon as we met. He was at the bar and I was at the bar and we happened to just sit down next to each other and we're having a drink and just started talking and one thing after another.
One thing led to another, and
the fact that I don't drink.
Yeah, well, you don't have to drink booze to sit at a bar, you know.
That is correct.
It's a little weird.
You know,
sometimes.
you could. It can be. It can be. But I think I was eating some of their chips too, or something.
You were.
I
That's right.
I was getting a little nosh between things to do and relaxing and stuff. And Mason was sitting there, and I was just like, you know me, I'm friendly me. I just thought I like talking to people and getting to know people. And I've met so many great people at Comic-Con in different places. In fact, at that bar. And some of them, and many of them are still friends, and some of them I have professional relationships with now, like Mason. So he was talking about his book, and the Shadow Mark, which is the cover work is behind me right now. And I said, well, do you do audio adaptations? And he said he was interested in trying to get something like that. So we touched bases after Comic-Con, and one thing led to another, and here we are, actually getting this Kickstarter going, officially launching on October 1st is the plan, and we're really excited. I love the book. It's great. I think you're all gonna love the book.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Mason, we've heard Mark's fairy tale story on how that first meeting went. How'd it go on from your end?
It is true to every word he said. I like both of us were very friendly and like to talk to people, so we just started chatting each other up, and just one common element after another about how much we love genre and how much we love audiobooks and fantasy, and we just I told him that I write gay speculative fiction, and his eyes lit up, and we just went from there. And it's been an incredible partnership. I can't shout it loud enough how just every day I'm so impressed by Marc and his work ethic, and it's like he reaches into my brain and pulls out exactly what I intended for that character. And I don't know how he does it, but it's kind of astounding. He would send me these video clips and say, well, this is kind of where I thought this character was going, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, it's exactly how I wanted them to sound. And it was just, it's spooky in a lot of ways, how he is so right on point on everything that I wanted to accomplish with this story. And like just minor things here or there, but otherwise, like just 99% of them is like knocks it out of the park the first try. It's really astounding. Yeah.
So is this the first time, Mason, is this the first time that you've heard somebody orally interpret your writing?
So I had my first book did get an audio version. And yeah, so it's a strange story for that one too, but so that was done through the publisher that I was with at the time. Mm-hmm. And the narrator there is Joel Leslie, who is also an incredibly well established, and I was incredibly lucky to have him for my first book out of the gate, to get Joel Leslie to read it. I was very lucky. But then since I left the publisher, I didn't get the other books made yet. So it's always been on the back burner of something I wanted to get done. And I love the process of hearing it go to audio. It's fascinating to hear how people interpret your work, and to hear it back in tone and inflection and emotion and all like things that are in my head coming to life is really just such a glorious experience. And going back to Marc and just how easy it has been to work with them for this project. I just can't wait to hear the end result.
Now, I know I love audiobooks, but I know they're not always done the same. Sometimes they're straightforward readings, and sometimes they're performative. And knowing Marc, I can only imagine that there are a number of voices associated with characters. So you're actually characterizing performance, right, Marc?
Oh yeah, you bet. I am a multi-voice.
I would expect nothing
talent.
less of you.
I'm a character. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't not do it. It's just part of who I am, and what I've always done in my voice work. Usually getting a lot more voices for voices that I do rather than my own voice. But this is kind of like a combination of that. So, yes, I am performing this work. It's narration, but there's all the characters are acted out in their dialogues. We haven't really changed it. It's exactly the text as Mason wrote it. So, but yes, I'm bringing character and performance, different voices in, probably more than you hear in a lot of different audiobooks out there. There are some, I know there are people who do it, but these are not. Some of these are very different characters and some real strong voice work here. So it's been exciting and fun for me as a voice actor to be able to embody these characters and analyze it. And one of the great things about Mason's writing is that it really, his descriptions of the characters and their dialogue really lent themselves to certain types of voices that I used and ideas, and that's why it was so easy for me to really I pinned down what I see this character as when I'm reading it and hearing it in my mind's, hearing it inside your brain before you start speaking it. And of course, when you're reading it, you play around with it a bit, just on your own, just to see, when you're reading it out loud, what it's like. And found some great voices for the characters that really worked for me and fit for me. And I'm so glad they worked for Mason as well.
It's incredible. And one of the things that I never even considered when we were talking, we had a long Zoom meeting about a week ago, right?
Yeah.
And he would making sure that all the people that are in the room sound like they're supposed to sound, but at the same time are distinctive enough to where you can tell when one person's talking, even if it doesn't have a dialogue tag. So his mindfulness of being able to puzzle that together, I was just so blown away by it. And he pieced together that so this character is going to sound like this, so it doesn't sound like this, but it was just blew me away. It's just
that's where Marc's voiceover background, I'm sure, comes in really handy, because Marc, I'm sure you've done it.
Yeah,
most voice actors have had to do it where they've acted opposite themselves multiple times on various projects.
I have, and
4 or 5 characters, right?
You have to be and you have to be distinctive enough. And sometimes you lose a part because you're not going to be able to give it enough of a differentiation. Or they go, "Oh my God, you're a main character. You can't talk to yourself in this minor role unless you can make it sound really different." And many times I do, but sometimes they go, "You know what? Let's use so and so for that." And that's okay. That happens, and it's something that you run into a lot with character voice work when you're dealing with people who are multi-voice like myself. So so I did bring that sensibility in when I was casting the voices for that I will perform for the different characters, and I wanted to be mindful that the audience, when they're listening to it, is very clear which character is speaking at each time. So, I can't separate things completely, to be able to sound totally high and totally low. So it's going to be in my range. But there will be enough distinction in accent, dialect, delivery, attitude, all these types of things that will differentiate the characters. And some of them are very, very different in their voices, and you may not realize they would be the same actor. It would depend on the scene and the characters, but yeah. And we made some distinct decisions too about accents and dialects and things like that. We feel that in the fantasy genre, a lot of people, just out of the way that films have been made, kind of expect people to almost speak with a British accent most of the time in fantasy properties. Not always, but many times.
Very, very often.
Yeah, and it's just something.
New Zealand is becoming a common accent for all that too. So.
It is too, just for the reason that so many productions are done there. Yeah. And same with Australia. And so we're seeing more and more of that in some of the other Disney casting that they're doing down there too. So I wanted to, I thought to keep it distinct, I would do the narration in my standard voice, an American accent, and then the characters could speak in different accents and dialects, and so that's how we worked it out. And
that's awesome.
I
know as a screenwriter, because when we write screenplays, Mason, I don't know if you've written any screenplays, but when we write screenplays, we refrain from inner dialogue. We refrain from a lot of scene description and motivation description. And so an actor's really left to just the dialogue itself to interpret a character. But as a novelization, you have the freedom to really give Mark, through your writing, a lot more detail on who a character is, what their motivations are, you know, the background of where they come from, what kind of region of the world they're at. Like, you do a lot of the backstory stuff that a lot of actors spend a great deal of time learning to make up for themselves. How do you go about creating a character and figuring out those kinds of backgrounds as a writer for yourself? Because obviously you've done a good job of it, because Mark feels like everything was on the page and you didn't have a whole lot of notes for him, which means he actually got what you were trying to say. So you mind just kind of explaining a little bit of your process in creating characters and kind of the world building that you must be doing?
Yeah, it's sort of a convoluted. It's going to be a convoluted answer.
Well, it's a convoluted world.
Yeah, the main characters, I start off. I'm a pantser by heart. I just sit and start writing, see where the story goes, and then at a certain point, I pause and I go back and I start filling in, like caulking in the missing elements, and start really building the character there. Once I understand who I want the characters to be in the initial draft, they kind of inform me who they're going to be in some respect, and then I go back and I fill in details, that backstory and things like that would explain why they are the way they are. But a lot of the side characters too, they just show up on stage and they are who they are, and it's funny to me that it just comes from this subconscious part of me. I call it letting the dog off the leash, and just let them be who they are, and how they fit in the story just kind of works itself out. But as far as like how I express that on the page, is I'm really intentional about all of their dialogue should speak to who they are, every line. So every line that they speak should be a hint or a clue as to who they are. So it's a lot of subtlety, but it's also over time builds up to give a framework of who that character is. So I don't try to shoehorn in a lot of detail that is like heavy-handed description of. I let their behavior and their dialogue do that for me, and it's just making sure that it is just this subtle undercurrent of who they are and how they think and what they say that gives clues as to what the character is and what drives them. Very
cool. So now that we've explained all that, do you want to give us a little synopsis of what the Shadow Mark is all about?
Sure. The Shadow Mark is about a former military commander that's on the run. He is accused of murder. And so he's just a drifter going from town to town, just trying to survive and stay out of trouble, stay away from getting caught. When a couple of people shares fire with him, and one is an older gentleman and another one's a younger one, and they seem to be on the run too. And he learns a little bit about why they're on the run, and there is a turn of events that happen around their fire that lead to Arik, the main character, deciding that nope, I'm gonna see that this guy's protected. He's being chased by assassins himself. They don't know why, but he decides, well, I'm going to protect him until we figure it out. And they go on this adventure together, trying to both stay alive and develop an unexpected bond between them as they go on their journey.
It's a great arc too for both characters. Both Arik and Kane really transform and change by the end of the story, so it's a lot of fun. In watching that process as they start as totally odd bedfellows and very different types of people, and kind of you start seeing them understanding and accepting things about each other and really coming to learn and depend on one another for things. So it's really it's a great character arc. And speaking to what Mason was talking about in terms of character before, with dialogue, that was one of the things as an actor that was really great, is that the dialogue that you do write does inform these characters very well. I think it gave them very distinct personalities, helped me choose where I wanted to place the voice, what type of accent. For instance, the two main characters. Arik is more of a soldiery sound, so he sounds a little deeper, a little gruff, a little bit more acerbic sometimes. And I kept him with one accent, and then we really the other character, Kane, is more of a country boy. He's a boy from a small town, and or a village really, and hasn't really had much experience of the world. He's very innocent. He's an orphan, and so he's thrust into this big world and this major events happening and mystery, and the stakes just keep going up and up and up and up throughout the story to a very major climax that brings in things that are well beyond these characters and worlds that they never thought they'd interact with in their own world. There's redemption, there's mystery, there's romance. There's all sorts of great things along the way. Magic, don't forget magic. There's magic too.
Magic.
There's some magic.
Intrigue.
Definite intrigue. There's fighting. There's intrigue on many levels. There's the mystery of what's going on with them. There's a whole sort of conspiracy possibly thing that they discover. So there's a lot of things that really hook you into the story. And make it flow along very quickly. It's a very easy read, and I think it's going to be and I mean, as far as it draws you in and keeps you hooked, and you want to read the whole thing. You know, it's like, oh, just another chapter. Oh, just, one of those types of books. So
very kind words.
But it's true. I mean, I really enjoyed the whole journey, and it's so exciting to be able to work on a project like this that you really love, and that you're going to be able to now bring it to a different audience, and also use the same material and speak to people with those characters. So it's exciting. I'm very excited to be part of this, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
Me too.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mason. No, I was just going to say that, like, one of the things that when I was writing it is I really wanted to just keep pushing the two of them to the limit. And they depend on each other so much by the end of the story, and they get to understand each other so much by the end of the story. But I wanted to just keep pushing them farther and farther, both physically and mentally. And they both really take a beating by the end. And I loved just taking them as far as they can go and find out what they would do. How did they respond to those kinds of pressures? And that's the part I loved about writing this book, was just to see how far I could beat them up.
and he does. and he's not afraid to kill characters either. So there are some characters that are introduced, and they may not make it to the end of the book. So
well, that's the way it should be, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's right for the story. It's all really good storytelling of why the things happen, and how one thing leads to another. So it's a really interesting world, and as one of the are we doing it as a push goal? I can't remember, or is it just another level of contribution with Three Tales, Mason?
Oh, it's a reward for.
It's a reward. Okay. Yeah. So he also has written 3 other short stories that take place in the same world that we're also recording. And it's doesn't have anything to do with the characters in the Shadow Mark directly, as far as we know. There's no tie-ins when you can listen to each of those stories standalone. And they're each quite different explorations into different aspects of the same world and universe that the Shadow Mark takes place in. And that was a lot of fun too, because each of those is a really interesting and fun self-contained story that just it brings this really wonderful moment to light, and a new aspect of this mythology, cosmology world that he's got there, and explores that. So that's a lot of fun too. So we have that as well that we've done. So there are 3 of those again. So it's I'm forgetting the name of the one, the one with the chest. Which
the black chest.
The black chest. Okay, there you go. And the Ode to Gamdosa, and the third one is Herb.
Yes.
So, because it's got.
I think it's great that you're also doing those short stories as audiobooks. I myself, I love books. And I grew up reading. You know, my dad had a thing with me when my parents divorced that like every week he bought me a new novel to read. And I had to read that whole novel by the time I came back around a week later to visit him again. And we'd talk about the book and he'd buy me another book. And we just kind of did that for years. And I loved it. You know, it exposed me to so much fantasy and so much science fiction and history and period pieces, and just expanded my whole worldview because of all these different books that I got to read. But as I've gotten older and my time has gotten, you know, more crunched and my eyes are, you know, doing the old man eyes thing, you know, reading is, you know, progressively harder and harder for me to do. But hey, I have a 2-hour commute going to and from work every day. So audiobooks kind of become my lifeline to the written word. So I Mark, as soon as you were like, hey, you know, I'm doing this audiobook and, you know, I'd love to bring the author on and talk about it, I was totally into it. Like, let's do it. Because
yay.
I think there's a lot of people
too.
out there like me who would love to read a book, but for various reasons, it's just difficult to make that happen. And I think audio dramas, audiobooks are so great for helping people stay tapped into the written word, which I think is incredibly important.
I agree. And I think
and it
so many
keeps
people have asked
writers
about it.
writing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've had so many people ask me about when this is going to become an audiobook, and this was literally years in coming, and I'm just could not be more excited to, like Mark said, like a whole new audience of people now can experience it, and I'm just could not be more thrilled.
I think what's amazing too is there are a lot of people who want the print book as well as the audiobook. So there's people who like to experience the same thing that they enjoyed reading in another format. But I think your story, David, is not unusual these days, as people do have longer commutes, or they might be going on a trip, or you know, maybe it's just harder to read for some folks than it used to be just reading wise. So
yeah, I gotta wear these stupid glasses just to look at you guys on my computer monitor, you know, like
I have my own readers.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm nearsighted, so I have eyes that are great for reading and seeing like we're doing now, but you know, anything far, that's when the specs come out. Yeah, it's these guys. So but yeah, I totally get that. So but that's another reason too why it's great that we have e-versions of books and stuff too, so that more people can read in e-readers and things like that. So it's nice to have different formats that help different people to be able to experience books. And audiobooks also help the people who are either non-sighted or have other vision issues with being able to read print. It gives them a whole other way to experience things too. So, and some people just don't have the patience to read the same way. We have audiences now who like to be entertained more, just growing up with television and things like that. So, they're definitely an audience for audiobooks, but I don't think they're the only one. I think a lot of audiobook listeners are also readers. That's been at least my experience. So I think it's just, and some people I know have heard the audiobook and then they go out and buy the print book. So, and that's great.
I do that for books that really blow my mind on an audiobook. I'll go out and buy the book just to make sure that the book gets the credit as well, you know, like,
yes.
And then it has an honored place on your bookshelf too, as one
exactly. Like, you
absolutely.
know, I heard this in an audiobook fashion, and I may not be able to ever read the book itself, but I want people to see it.
Yep.
It'll be on my bookshelf in my living room or in my bedroom, and I want people to see it when they come visit, so that they know that's something they should be reading too.
Right, because you can't really display an audiobook for the most instances. I mean, in the old days, you used to get little cases with the stuff in it. Now it's all, you know, it's all streaming. You know, through
sometimes I'll take a screenshot and share that on social media and say, "This is what I'm listening to right now, and it's awesome." You know. So. Hey, you gave me a couple of samples of stuff. Do you want to play some?
Yeah, I was going to say this would probably be a good place to play a sample. So our first sample is from The Shadow Mark. So that's the main novel that we're voicing here. And this takes place in sort of what Mason was talking about, how the two main characters kind of encounter each other with another character as well as there. And they're meeting in the first chapter, so it's early on. We're not going to spoil any story for you, but it gives you an idea of the tone, the characters, and stuff like that.
Okay, so we've never done audio only playback on the video podcast before, so this will be first for all of us, right?
Yep.
So if we're just sitting here kind of dumbly listening along, that's what we all do when we listen to an audiobook, right? We just sit quiet and pay attention. So here we go. This is the Shadow Mark sample with Mark doing the voices and Mason having written it.
He wasn't sure why, but despite his own reservations, he found himself compelled to agree to Old Tan's offer. Less for himself and more for them. A vision of the two of them alone on the road was unsettling, especially considering the highwaymen he'd encountered earlier. They would be easy targets.
"It is always better to travel with others when you can," Auric said. "I will join you tomorrow."
He looked directly at Kane.
"As long as all are in agreement."
Kane held Auric's gaze for several moments, as if trying to gauge his character. "You travel by horse, sir. We will slow you down." His voice had a deep resonance that surprised Auric. Auric shrugged.
"I've no appointments at the moment, and I walk more than I ride anyway."
Kane's subtle lift of his eyebrows betrayed his skepticism about the truth of that.
"You seem decent folk,"
Auric added.
"I would appreciate the company, I think."
"You know nothing about us." Auric felt the corner of his mouth lift a fraction.
"I know enough."
"And we know nothing of you."
"But we know enough,"
Old Tan put in gently. Kane glanced at Old Tan, then made a barely perceptible shrug of one shoulder. "Very well," he said, attempting an air of nonchalance. "If we'll not be inconveniencing you."
"Not at all,"
said Auric. Old Tan's grin widened.
"Well then, there it is. What a happy meeting this turned out to be, yes?"
The fire was dying down. Flames hugged closer to the wood and burned redder and tamer. The fragile cathedral of spent wood collapsed in on itself with a crackle. Auric reached over and grabbed another pine log from his meager pile and tossed it onto the flames. Bright sparks leaped into the air, riding the eddies of smoke.
"Sleep,"
Auric told them.
"I'll keep watch for now."
Old Tan's brow furrowed, and he looked as if he was on the verge of protest, but Auric cut it off before he could voice it.
"I'm not tired,"
he said. Old Tan looked like he wanted to argue, but Auric could see the fatigue winning over. After a long pause, he nodded. Kane glanced over at his master a moment, then turned his eyes back to Auric. "Wake me when you're ready. I will tend to the fire next." Auric replied with a nod. Old Tan wasted no time curling up on the ground in his cloak. Eyes closed, he fell into a steady rhythm of breathing almost immediately. Kane, on the other hand, spent time clearing away sticks and pebbles from his spot by the fire, smoothing the ground out with his hand. This was not someone accustomed to sleeping out under an open sky. He tried first to lie on his side, grunted, and moved onto his back. Arms folded over his chest, he closed his eyes. Auric leaned back, propping his torso up with his arms behind him, and stared into flames eating up the fresh wood. Then the ambush began.
Nice. Cliffhanger at the end. That's actually the end, the whole end sequence from chapter 1. So, but I think it gives a good idea of who the characters are a little bit in their initial introductions and their reticence about each other initially, since they are all kind of on the run for different reasons and brought together through circumstance and not quite sure whether they should even trust each other. So
I have to ask a technical question of you, Mark,
sure,
as a performer. So when approaching the audiobook, do you read it straight through and bounce between characters as you go, or are you piecing it together as various performances plus the narrator and putting it together in post?
I'm still exploring what process works best for me because I'm new to this world of doing this, and normally we single track our characters in other properties. But I've done both, actually. I've done some of it has stuck from when I actually read it. I might give myself a slight pause just to make sure I come out of one voice and go into the other. But yeah, I actually do read them initially, especially in the first take, through all the way as the characters. And then when you go back through playback, you might realize, because of the weirdness of going between characters,
Didn't
maybe
quite
I'll do
get far enough into that
accent.
Yeah,
Or that wasn't quite the way I wanted to do that. So, or you come up with another idea. So I do a little bit of both.
Because I dabble a little bit in voice work, and doing audio books is something I've always kind of wished I was doing or could do. So I always, when I'm listening to them, I'm always wondering about various performers' processes, and so I thought, oh, what a great chance I'm going to get to ask Mark how he's approaching it.
It's I'm comfortable doing it. I'm not sure all actors are. I think for any other actors, narrators, readers, whatever you want to call us, who are doing this type of work, I think you have to find what process works best for you to give the best performance. I think that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Just doing it because it's convenient for editing is not a great reason to do it, honestly. You want to have the best product at the end of the day. So I do it because it gives me at least placeholders if I need to replace something too. But I do find I do give myself a little, extra beat than I might have normally if I were reading the story live to someone. Even with character voices, I would probably flow a little bit faster in person. But in recording, I tend to give myself just a little bit more editing space in case and then I can, take that out or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In post. Yeah, I just find that that's a process with how it works best for me. I did end up redoing Kane because I came up with a better idea for my first voice for him and really settled into something. I wanted to use a West Country accent for him, and in the first chapter you don't get too many things that way. Where his accent really comes through. He has very short lines, but as it goes on, you'll hear more of that, and he gets into his natural rhythms, and it really fits well as a counterpoint to Arik's voice, I think, too. It makes them very distinct people, and the West Country accent is often associated, and not rightly so, but with farmers a lot in the West Countries of England and stuff. So, and he is from a farming family and community. So, although he works as a tanner now, a tanner apprentice, and it fit as sort of country boy comes to the city type of accent, which we were kind of going for.
The trick was
even when you're dealing with American accents, right or wrong, that Southern drawl is associated with farmers.
Right. And sometimes with people who are less intelligent, that's not the case at all. An accent doesn't necessarily imply intelligence.
That was the trick for this, right? I mean, that's the one that you wanted to make sure that he had the country sounded like a simple villager, but not make him sound like he was unintelligent.
Right. And he's just inexperienced. He's naive about certain things, but he's not stupid by any means. He's very capable. He's thinking things through all the time. Seeing different angles of things. He has very much a good heart too. And I think there's something that also I loved being able to bring out, because that accent to me, when you listen to it, it's very close. It's, in fact, at times it's almost the same as the American accent now. It's the one that's closest to ours in England. And there's almost a heartfulness to a lot of his dialogue and his lines and when he speaks. And that accent has kind of that type of feel to me too, which was really important to bring into that character. So that's
what struck me, is that it had just like a warm empathy behind it. He really was very empathetic and very understanding, and he's very much an empath in terms of being able to read Arik.
And outside of of the circumstance he's in now, he's a very friendly person. He gets along well with people. He's conversational. He meets other characters later in the book where they just, he's having these long conversations with them, sometimes really to Aric's frustration. So Aric is very much the opposite, though. He's very closed down. He's shut down his heart. He's shut down his ability to trust other people. And he comes off maybe as cold, but he's not necessarily cold. He's protected, is what it really is. And he's also trying to protect others through some of his own choices that he's made, without giving away too much, I think. I don't know, Mason. Am I
you're spot on.
Staying good? Okay,
No.
right on.
See what I mean? It's spooky. And it's like he reaches
Yeah.
into my brain and just like pulls out these details that he understands who they are.
It's there in the text. I got to tell you, that's the thing. I mean, it's what I tell actors all the time is sometimes you have to pull things that aren't on the page off when you're looking at scripts, because we don't get all this backstory and narrative and other description that you get, and it's very rich in a novel. However, especially in dialogue, authors do a lot of work to make the characters speak in the way that they are, and every word is well chosen for that character, so it matters a lot.
And I think that oftentimes is very much a difference between a reasonably good writer and a really excellent writer, is the ability to write dialogue that sounds unique to a character.
Yeah,
right.
So that not all the characters sound the same.
It gets really hard too when you have characters that are only on the page for a single chapter, and to have them sound distinct and unique really takes a lot of intentional work on the dialogue to make sure that their personality comes through in a much shorter amount of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I forget what I was going to say there, but no, you said that's a wonderful statement, though, as far as that goes. Maybe we should listen to the other sample, which is from the short stories now. So this is from the Ode to Gamdosa. This involves the two main characters, as well as this third character, Durek, who's the barkeep, who's kind of a feisty little guy. And then Alfric, who is a bard, who has just finished performing a set there, finishing up a conversation with the innkeeper where he's staying and all that stuff. And then a person who had been there the other night, Tanner, who had heard the performance is coming and stayed later after this performance to talk specifically to Alfric. So, and this is kind of that part of that scene in this story.
Okay, well, here it is.
Durek lifted his hands in the air in a form of surrender.
Well, no need to rush into any decisions at this time of the night, Master Bard. I'm certain you are weary from your performance. We can discuss this further in the morning.
Indeed, Alfric made as if he was stifling a yawn with the back of his fist.
I will sleep like the dead tonight.
Durek slunk off back toward his bar, looking defeated and confused. Alfric looked back at Tanner and allowed his smile to open further. Well now, you've returned, but it appears too late for my performance. Tanner's eyes couldn't mask his surprise. You remember me? I do indeed. 2 nights ago by the hearth. You were alone. Tanner scrunched his face, embarrassed for a reason Alfric couldn't name. His cheeks turned pink. Your timing seems to imply you have a different purpose for being here, Alfric pressed on. How can I aid you, friend? Tanner avoided Alfric's direct gaze as if it made him uncomfortable. I hate to bother you about such a thing, but I didn't know what else to do. Oh my, sounds serious, Alfric said. He allowed the smile to drop and instead donned a sober expression. Not terribly so, just annoying, really. One of your songs, the jaunty one about the adventures of Gamdosa? Ah, yes, one of my favorites. Well, it's giving me the most frustrating earworm. Alfric lifted his brow. Oh.
And then
Gotta
we
look
just
up those
stopped right
frustrating
there.
earworms.
Yes. And with the fantasy world, you can imagine it might have some different connotations.
Oh, that's great.
But so yeah, this is it's a cute tale. It's definitely very different tone from the other story.
Mhm.
So no combat in this one. That's another thing that's great too. I have to say with the Shadow Mark, there are some great fight scenes in it, and really descriptive. They don't go on forever. They're tight. They're action oriented, and that's a lot of fun reading that, because in those moments it's really my narration that has to explain everything, because people aren't having conversations in the middle of the fight usually. Maybe a word or two here or there.
I'm gonna cross you here and I'm gonna block you there.
Exactly.
You're not gonna get any of that, right?
You get none of that type of stuff. So you really have to sell it with pacing, with energy, with a change up. So it's not going to be just very standard narration pace. The pacing is going to have to adjust to the fight, and you have to feel the excitement of that moment. And since it's this theater of the mind when we're doing audio, I really have to draw you in with kind of like how a mime uses their body to teach you a whole story and to display that. I have to do that with my voice. So pacing, energy, sometimes very staccato, sometimes very, and then pauses in the right times too, and sometimes the dramatic effect of what happens. So I hope it's I hope I'm making it as clear as I think I am. So, but the time will tell. As long as Mason is happy, that makes me happy, and
yeah, that should be your starting point for all of it, right? So
absolutely,
if the writer's happy,
and
then you're in good shape.
Yeah, and he's been very happy so far, and so that's always my job, is to make the and it's a team effort too, so it's a creative thing, and I'm not if he sees an issue with something and lets me know, I'll adjust that, so that's part of the process, is coming together, because it makes it's a team effort, and it makes it even a better product at that point. So it's been so much fun, I have to tell you. Editing is not so much fun, I'll be honest.
Yeah, my end either.
I'm in the middle of audio editing on a feature film right now.
Oh, so
I totally feel you, man.
And it's different too. As a voice actor coming into the world of audiobooks, that I've done some types of things like this before, but I had an engineer, I had an editor that would do all that other work for me. In this world, it's you got to learn. So yeah, I have to learn some other things and techniques to be able to, thankfully, services like ACX have come along, which gave you a standard of how you should adhere to things and get the right types of levels. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you learn a lot of technical stuff. It's been a bit of a learning curve, I'll admit, for this first book, but I bring decades of other experience to the table that make up for that. So, but it's been
I think
fun.
That's part of why we become creatives, right? Because we like to learn new things, and I think that's part of the deal, right? Is we just continually learn and train and teach ourselves to do all sorts of new things. I think it's just kind of in the creative's blood.
It is. It's basically a one-man show, which every actor would love to do something like that someday, right. So it's like for me, it's a dream in a lot of ways. And plus I love fantasy as a genre. I love science fiction as a genre. So all these types of properties, this is stuff I grew up with. So being able to be part of these worlds, because I get involved in projects that are so far removed from these types of things and so mundane that that it's really nice to have something that takes you to a place that's an escape, but entertaining at the same time. So, So I've been loving the whole process of going through that, discovering the characters, and then now really putting it all together and bringing it together in the actual files that we're going to upload.
Mason, I'd be, totally not doing my job if I didn't ask you a little bit about your own background and how you came to be an author. You always know that you would be one, or is it something
I've always
discovered?
wanted to be one, even as a kid. Really, it's a funny story that when I was 13 and I was writing my own little short stories, and I wanted to make a science fiction magazine for my school. And I didn't want it to be just all my own short stories. So I had this idea that I would write to Isaac Asimov and ask if I could use part of his stories. So I wrote him a letter, and sure enough, he sent me back a reply on a postcard, and I still have it today, signed with his name on it. He typed it out on a postcard that I wasn't allowed to use any of his short stories because he didn't actually own them. And I just was so impressed with the idea that he would do that. And from that moment on, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be that. I wanted to be that author. And I kept writing from that age on. And I did take a hiatus for a while, like after college, and I went, picked a career and blah, blah, blah. And then I started writing, and I did this sprawling epic, like this Game of Thrones style, multi-character, 200,000 word nonsense. And it was absolutely awful. It was really terrible. It was contrived. It was awful. But I did finish it, and it taught me that I could write a novel. I could do it. I knew that it's actually something I could do from beginning to end. And then I got advice from somebody that was, because I was trying to make it fit, and there was all these square pegs and round holes that I couldn't. It was just too convoluted. So somebody said, put it on a shelf, forget about it, sit down and write your next one. And so that's what I did. Then I wrote my next book, which was Lord Mouse, and that's the one that got picked up. And that's really started my journey of writing novels. And now I've written a total of 7 so far. I have a 4th one coming out this coming year, and then another one that's finished that I'm working on too. So yeah, it's been a fun journey. I dig it.
That's awesome. What's your routine for writing? Do you set aside a specific period of time in the day and
usually
write no matter what?
Yeah, I come home from work and I start. Usually in the evening. I'm a night owl by nature, and my best creative window is between 10 and midnight. So
I hear you.
when the house is quiet.
That's my thing too.
Yeah. Me too. Well, actually, I'd say 10 to 2, but
yeah, I would too. But
now that I've got a 9 to 5 job, my creative work's suffering because I can't stay up so late.
I know it's hard, isn't it?
I'm wasting all my best creative hours sleeping.
Right? It's ridiculous. For the day job, I have to get up too early to stay up till 2, but that is definitely my prime time of my brain turns on. So I try to write every day. I try to get it just words on a paper, get out of my own way, and just write. Like I said, I tend to be a pantser and just like see where my story goes. I like to think that if I'm surprised, my readers will be too. So I do go back and editing process and fill in all the gaps that need to be filled in and make it a cohesive story. And I also like a quote by Isaac Asimov: "Above all else, be clear." Mm-hmm. So part of my process is just making sure that my story is clear and not too descriptive, but also not too bare. So it's an interesting balance.
Yeah. One other question: are you a pen and paper kind of guy, or are you a sit down at the keyboard and type?
I'm a keyboarder. Yeah. I hate my penmanship, so I get too.
I love my penmanship. I just don't have the patience to do it.
Same. It's my ADD. Yeah. I start writing. Just toss it out. I can't do it. So I can sit at a keyboard and type for hours, but like having to write things on paper, I can't do it.
I don't think my hand could even do that anymore, deal with the stress of that. I think it'd tire out really fast these
Right?
days.
Yeah,
You know, I'm
yeah.
so used to typing everything. I a lot of respect for the people who still do that type of work. That's not me.
Now, interestingly enough, I've picked up an iPad Pro and I've got the Apple Pencil and I've started writing my notes that way. And I don't fatigue writing
Oh, really?
digitally the way I
Oh,
fatigue
that's
writing with ink,
nice.
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
you don't have to put so much pressure,
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
right?
Sure.
You just kind of
And
flow.
that's my problem. I do
And I'm
put a lot
actually
of
finding
pressure.
myself writing a lot more now that my iPad allows me to do that without straining.
Cool.
And does it
That's a
convert it
good
then into
point.
text afterward? Then can you like take
You
your
can,
writing?
depending on what app you're using and whatnot, you can set it to either just accept it as your handwriting, or it'll interpret it
Oh, that's
and
cool.
then turn it into written text that you can copy and paste into other stuff. But yeah, I'm kind of like enjoying getting back into writing again, like with my hand. But it's digital. So,
Yeah.
kind of interesting
You
that
know,
it's
It
bringing
is.
me
Go ahead.
back to the old school, but making it less painful.
Yeah.
there was one thing I was thinking about that also another reason why I love being involved in this property that I wanted to say before I go, and that's being a gay man, being able to approach a subject that where I really understand that world and the people in it. Now, I'm not saying this is a gay novel, because it's there are a couple characters in there who are gay, and that's great, and that's it, but it's not the core focus of everything. It's part of the arc. It's part of important stuff in the story, but it's not. I don't want to say that it's like not important, because it is. But it fits within the story, and it works really well. And it's nice to be able to be a gay man and give voice to gay characters too. So
That was always my intention. And two, when I was writing it, was to, because I've read a number of stories that were gay stories that had just a fantasy backdrop that had nothing to do with the story. I wanted them to populate that world and be a part of that world, and be positive, strong characters, strong gay characters in that world, in a world that accepts them for the most part for who they are. And that's always was really important to me, to have that as these characters that exist in this world, and they're a part of it, and it's all together. It's not a gay novel. It's not a fantasy novel per se. It's all interwoven.
That's beautiful. And I think that's the way it should be, right? Like, they should just be characters. And in the end, it doesn't affect how they fight or anything, right? Like,
right. Exactly.
No.
Yeah.
It's just being
No, I
alive.
would not want to.
You know?
I would not want to have to go up against Arik. I'll tell you that.
I agree. I don't think anybody would. And it's for me too. It's I didn't want it to be a story like a coming out story, or a story of adversity for being gay, because that's all been done. I wanted them to live their lives as gay men, and be strong and be positive examples of gay characters in a book.
Well, and I think in the end, too, the best way to kind of encourage acceptance is to just show acceptance,
right?
Not adversity necessarily, right?
Right.
Like, if we can just envision a world where that acceptance is normal, then that becomes normal,
right?
And should be normal, right?
And that's what this is the novel that I wanted to read as a kid, where I could read a gay character that is living his life and being true to his life, and living in this fantasy world. It's the novel I wanted to read.
That's fantastic.
That's why I sat down and wrote it.
And it spoke that way to me. I'll have to say that very much. When I was younger, I would love to have read a story like this. It would have been very affirming for me. I will also say that we hope to make you cry at certain points in this book. I know I did when I read the book itself, so I'm hoping
probably the same parts where I cried when I wrote it.
Yes, exactly. So there's some very moving moments in the story that I think are going to really get the listener moved, and I'm looking forward to being able to do that. It's there's a lot of great story here.
Awesome. And so you guys are going to be. Did you launch a Kickstarter already? Are you about to launch a Kickstarter?
About to, October 1st.
October 1st. Okay. That's the
And
day
the
that this podcast is going to drop. So
Perfect
about that?
timing.
there we go.
The samples you hear here are the same samples that we'll have there. We may have some other stuff down the road too. As Kickstarters, you adjust as the thing is going through.
Well, you guys give me the link to your Kickstarter. I'll make sure it's in the show notes, both here and on the audio podcast. And I strongly encourage anybody who likes audiobooks to check this out and support the Kickstarter. I know I will.
We're so excited.
Look forward to hearing all the completed project.
And I think the contribution levels are very reasonable. That I think a lot of people will find it quite easy to contribute. And really, I think not only that, you're going to get some really great value, and you're really going to enjoy what you get. So we're very excited to bring this to you.
Fantastic. Well, Mark and Mason, thank you guys so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I'm gonna go and sign off and go rest. I got my flu vaccine and my COVID vaccine yesterday, and
oh my gosh, you got about a day and a half. If it's anything like
I'm at
mine,
the tail
although
end
mine was
tail end of feeling better, I guess.
Mine was just the COVID. I didn't want to combine the flu this time and I did have about a day and a half reaction just to COVID, but tomorrow morning
so I got a Friday afternoon,
flu.
so I'm just starting to feel a little bit normal, but being up for an hour with you guys has worn me out.
A lot of people feel that way.
Thanks for having us, David.
Thank you guys so much for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing the story with me and sharing the background on everything. And I really, really wish you guys all the success with the audiobook.
Thank you so much.
And Mason, with your future novels. Hopefully we can have you back to talk about your next book when it's ready.
I would love that.
Awesome. Yeah, just let me know.
Excellent.
All right, guys.
Thank you,
Later.
David. We really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Bye.
Hello there, citizens. I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the floaty that will not flush no matter how many times you try in the toilet bowl of crime. I am Darkwing Duck, telling you please, talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. Whatever the heck that means. After all, you are watching Intellectual Podcast with your ears.